Hello, and thank you so much for joining me here today, where we are going to talk about my top books of 2022. As you can see, I've got a bit of a stack here next to me. We'll take them one at a time. In the past, what I have done is done 10 books that I used for my videos and 10 books from my personal reads. Today, we're just going to combine those together and call it the top 20. So let's get started. I do have notes. It is a bigger pile, so I don't have everything memorized in the order, so I might be checking my notes occasionally. Please bear with me with that. So I'm going to be using categories again because it just makes it easier for me to choose books if I have them in categories. So I'll let you know the category and I'll let you know the book. So my first category was contemporary. And in this case, it's a romance. I don't normally read romances, but this is a romance that focuses on mental health. And it's Alone with You in the Ether by Olive Blake. And I bought this one in January basically because it takes place in one of my favorite museums, the Art Institute of Chicago, and I ended up really falling in love with this book. So I love the characters. I love that they have a relationship that no one else understands, but it's something that works for them. And they have to work through some problems, but they do that and they maintain their mental health by figuring out a way that works for them to do that. Next is historical fiction, and this is a YA book. And it's a book that I chose that I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did, but I really did like it. It's based on the author's ancestor's life. It is Buffalo Flats by Martine Leavitt. It involves a 17-year-old young woman living in the Northwest Territories in the 1800s who really wants to own a specific piece of land. But at that time and in that place, women weren't allowed to own property on their own. And so her and her mom come up with a way that she can actually work to buy the property. I love the spirit of the main character, and I love that the main character and her mother work together to help her achieve her dreams. The next is a mystery, and it's another YA book. And it's by an author whose books I've really enjoyed. This is the third book I've read by this author, and it is A Long Stretch of Bad Days by Mindy McGinnis. It takes part in the past and in the present. Two high school seniors need one more credit to graduate, and they decide to work together to solve the mysteries surrounding the long stretch of bad days. So in the past, their community faced a time of crisis where they had a tornado and then a flash flood, and there was the only murder that's ever been committed in the community, and it's unsolved, and there was also a disappearance of a girl. And they worked together to solve all of these mysteries, and what they discover about themselves will change their lives and their town. Next is a contemporary adaptation of a classic, and it is Pride by Evie Zaboi. This is an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, which you probably guessed from the title. Zuri lives in Brooklyn. She takes a lot of pride in her neighborhood. She takes a lot of pride in her family. She has a lot of pride in her Afro-Latino roots. She likes that her neighborhood is staying true to its roots. When the wealthy Darcy family moves in across the street, she wants nothing to do with either of their sons, and then she ends up working with Darius on a project, and they actually find that they have a lot in common. The author does a great job of taking this classic by Jane Austen and making it applicable to our current lives. So the next one is manga or graphic novel. I don't have the actual book here, but I do have an image of the front cover. It's Requiem of the Rose King, Volume 1, and it is a manga series that is based on two of Shakespeare's plays, Henry IV Part 3 and Richard III. That's all I need to say. Next is a folktale retelling, and it's one that I recently talked about, Winter Tales, Stories from Around the World. This is a wonderful book. I really enjoyed it. And it's by Dawn Casey. The illustrations, which are also amazing, are by Zana Goldhawk. So, stories with a supernatural element. This one I read earlier this year. I don't have the actual book here, but I do have an audiobook. And it is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I love the tone of this book. I love the way it's written. I love everything about it. Best final book of a series, and unfortunately I don't have the final book of this series here, but I do have the first book of the series, and it's the Scholomance series. I've recently talked about it. I've got A Deadly Education here. The final book of the series was The Golden Enclaves. This final book took everything I thought I knew about this series and turned it on its head. So the next is the New to Me series, and I am going to go with the Finlay Donovan series, which starts with Finlay Donovan is Killing It. It's by El Cosimano, and I've read 3 of the books in this series. The 4th book will be published in March of 2024. It's unusual for me to like a romance series. I've said that already today, but I do like this one. Part romance, part mystery, and I think there are some changes that are about to be coming. I always choose a breath of fresh air book. So a book that's so different from what I expect that it's just exciting to read. And Good Omens could be this book, but I've already chosen Good Omens for another category. And so I'm going to go with a book that's a little older. It's YA. It's new to me though. It's the first book of the Illuminae Files series, and it's Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. So mixed in with the story is excerpts from reports and excerpts of emails, things like this. It was just a really cool book to read. And the multimedia aspect made it really fun too. So this year I'm giving Dark Academia a category all of its own. So my favorite Dark Academia from 2023 is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. You can see that I've marked a bunch of spots, and I kind of do that when I read mysteries. I mark where I think there are important things going on so I can go back and try to figure out what's going on in the story. I know there have been some mixed reviews on this book. I really liked it. Fantasy is the next category. I'm honestly surprised that it's taken me to the 12th book to get to the fantasy category because I read a lot of fantasy. But now that we're here, I have to say that this is the book I started the new year with. It's very long at 1,006 pages. This one's marked up a lot too, but I loved everything about this story. I love the magic system, and I love the magic. If you like fairies and magic systems in your books, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke is an excellent book to read. I'm going to stop and rearrange some of these books. All right, our next category is mysteries. I was going to do classic mystery, but I didn't really read a lot of just classic mysteries this year. I have an adaptation of a classic mystery, and it's a study in Charlotte. It's a surprising update of the Sherlock Holmes stories, where Charlotte, the main character, is the third great-granddaughter of Sherlock Holmes. Jamie Watson is the third great-grandson of Dr. Watson. They have to work together to solve some mysteries. My next is YA series. This book is the third book of a series, and it's the third book of the One of Us is Lying series by Karen M. McManus. One of Us is Back. Was it as good as the first one? Probably not, just because you've already been exposed to the first one, so you know what her writing is like, but it was a really good continuation of the story. Short stories is next. I've read a few short story collections this year. I'm going to go with Everything's Eventual, 14 Dark Tales by Stephen King. I read half of it in October. I am finishing it up now. It was fun to get some Stephen King stories in smaller bites. So next I was going to do science fiction, but I think I only read one real science fiction book this year, so instead I'm going with magical realism. You could consider it science fiction if you consider time travel science fiction. And it gets a little sentimental, so if you're not into sentimental stories, then you probably want to skip it. I really like it. This is the fourth book of the series, Before We Say Goodbye. The series is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. If you're going to read it, you're going to need some tissues nearby. Next, round to favorite author. This is a category where I feel like I have to read all of the author's books that I haven't read. I've already done one of her books, Alone with You in the Ether. During the summer, I picked up Masters of Death, which only made me want to read One for My Enemy as well. So, Olivia Blake is favorite author of the year. This category is surprisingly, I loved it. And it is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. The book was suggested to me by a patron, and I read it not expecting to like it, and I loved it. Don't you love when that happens? So next and number 19 is a ghost story, and I went with Grimm by Sarah Elgren. It's a book set in Sweden, and it has elements of horror to it. And I love the way the stories in the past interweaves with the story in the present. And now we've got the category of a twist at the end, and I went with a book that is written as a series of letters. It's not for everyone. There are some pretty tough topics that are handled in this book. It's We Are the Light by Matthew Quick. Like I said, it's told as a series of letters, and the letters are written by the main character, a man, to the man who was his therapist. A horrible tragedy occurs, and the main character and others in the community are trying to regain a sense of normalcy and deal with their grief. So those were my top 20 books of 2023. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you'll join me again next year where I've got some big plans for us. Thank you so much for joining me today and for this entire year.